Okay, everyone. So in the last module, we kind of talked about, we got back into learning about CSS, and we talked about creating navigation bars, and we talked about, what else did we talk about? We talked about icon fonts, and now we could use those in our development. And we talked about web fonts like Google fonts and things like that, and at FontFace. Okay. All right, so, I said this a couple weeks ago. I was talking about, there's different types of CSS. There's what I call, this is a Mr. Hurwitz thing. This is not a formal thing, but I have what I call visual CSS. Visual CSS is like, background color, background image, font color, font family, things like that. Things that you can visually see, okay? And the other kind of, other type of CSS, at least in my opinion, is what's called, I call layout CSS, okay? Layout CSS is more about the spacing and the location of things as opposed to what color or texture they are. So we started with it with a lot of the box model stuff. That would be like, width and height, margins and such. And we kind of left off there for the first project, but now we're going to continue this. Okay. So today's going to be about continuing layout. Okay. So to understand layout, we have to start with this concept, which is called the normal flow. Okay. The normal flow is how a browser will normally render code. Okay, so this is today's files. You can load it into your editor. And so what normal flow says is that your code is going to be read top down, left to right. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, here I have this web page. And when this page gets loaded into your browser, it starts on line 1, and then it goes line 2, line 3, line 4, all the way down. And it also goes from the left side of the page, and it reads line, 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 line. All right, so it goes top down, left to right. Okay. So what exactly does that really mean? Well, I'm going to preview this page here. All right, so let me go back. So, top down, left to right means that if I put some information here at the top of the page, this is at the top. And I save and I preview this. It comes before this because top down. So it's read in procedural order. Okay. If I put something at the bottom of the page, it puts it at the bottom of the page. Top down. So anything at the top renders before anything at the bottom. Okay. That makes sense. And also it goes that, well, anything on the left renders, anything on the left renders before anything on the right. So I'm going to just do this. Let's do a strong. This is on the left. And then I'm going to do an italic. This is on the right. So this will render first because it's on the left and it's read first. And then this will render last or next because it's on the right. Top down, left to right. Okay. And that's how your browser normally works. Okay. Then what it does is it also goes by whether your tag is so it reads the code in procedural order. And then it also sees whether your content is either an inline or a block content. I know you're tired of me saying this, but it comes up a lot. So if something is an inline element, it displays in a line. If something is and you can have multiple inline elements. Displaying in a line like this. Or if something is a block, like say a paragraph, it displays vertically, okay? All right, so that's the normal flow. That is how our page normally lays out content, okay? What we're gonna be learning about over the next couple of days is how to, what is referred to typically by most developers as breaking the normal flow, okay? In other words, we're going to be applying CSS that's going to have it not necessarily do that, where stuff at the top does not necessarily render at the top of the page before something below it, or something on the right doesn't necessarily, does something on the left does not necessarily render on the left of something versus on the right, okay? All right, so let's show a couple of examples. So here I have this page. What I'd like to do is I actually want to create some columns. So normally, let's pretend this represents text. Normally we might have text that kind of looks like this. Oops. So our text goes all the way from one side all the way to the other. Now we use things like containers to kind of make that a little bit skinnier, right? Give it a width. But actually, what I would kind of like to have is I'd like to have something that's more like this, where I have columns, okay? Column 1, column 2, column 3, kind of like columns in the Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets or something like that. So we can do that with CSS. So the main thing is that your content has to be in a container. Okay, in this case, the container is my div tag. And so what I'm going to do is say div columns 2. All right. What it's going to do is take this div and divide it into 2 separate columns. All right. So essentially it takes, if we look at this div, goes from goes from here to here, and you can see where it kind of divides down the center, right? 1 column, 2 columns. I could even change this to 3 columns. So now there's like 1 column. This image is in the 2nd column here. Okay. You may, so I kind of think it looks a little bit better there. Let's say I had, actually, I'm going to divide this into, let's divide this into 4 columns. Okay. And I'm actually going to get rid of this image. I'm just going to comment this out at the moment. So if you see this, you can see how the heading is kind of caught in the first column, but I may want it to go across the entire page. Well, if you want to do something like that, what I could say is, well, you could make use what's called a column span. You could say column span all. Oops. Looks like that might be a H2 instead of an H1. Yeah. So now it goes across, see how it goes across the entire page, and then it starts to break everything into columns. So this is one way you could create columns very easily, is by having a container and then just saying columns. Now, when you create columns, it's going to have to make equidistant columns, which means each column gets exactly the same width as each other. You cannot, there's no property to change that, at least not in this method. All right, so that's one method. The next way we can play around with moving content around is what's called a float. Okay, so I talked about the concept of the normal flow. So here I have this page, and it has a bunch of paragraphs in it. It has a couple of images. It's about famous artist Jean-Michel Basquiat. All right, so here's this page. So at the moment, this image kind of just moves around, right? You can, and that's because images or IMG tags are inline elements. So it's actually moving along with this page, okay? And, you know, depending on where I place this image, because of top down, you know, if I place this image lower, then the image is going to be lower in the page, right? But I actually want to have, what I would like to do is I'd like the image to kind of act like this, where what I would like to do is have the image on one side and then have the text kind of wrap around it. You might have done this in like a Google Docs or a Microsoft Word or something like that, where essentially, you know, something like this. So how can, you know, let me just show an example of this. If I make a new document, I'm just gonna get some dummy text here. Actually, I'll just take this. Well, I don't want any of those p tags. 100 words. I'm going to add an image here. Let's add that snow leopard. And I'm going to put this snow leopard there. So I'm getting kind of the same issue where it's like the image is kind of in the line here. But actually what I'm going to do is under format, most programs have like something where it's like, you know, see how when I click on this, it's giving me these options to do inline or wrap text, and then it does that. That's kind of what I'm trying to do here. Okay, but we're trying to do it with CSS. So the way we can do this is by using something called a float. What floats do is floats will take the element, the float has been applied to, and move it either to the left side or right side of the container. Okay. Note that floats break the normal flow. Okay, so they're not held back by that normal flow of top down, left, right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class. Okay, I'm going to create a class called float left. And we're going to use the float property, CSS property. It takes basically it takes three options. It takes left, it takes right, or it takes none. Okay, none means it basically removes the float. I'm going to say float left. And what I'm going to do is then place it or attach it to this image. Okay, let's go back And you can see I'm starting to get what I want. So notice that this text kind of, watch this particular text, see how it kind of like changes its position vertically. So it's like, it doesn't matter how this text lays out. This always is on the left side of the page, okay? So the way I've done it is I've taken this image and I've broken it out of the normal flow. It's no longer based on this other text like it was before. It's just always going to be over here floating, okay? You can see if I undo that, it goes back to its normal situation where it will reposition itself based on how the page is and how much text there is. This overrides that, okay? So this can be good because it allows you to break something out of the normal flow. Okay, now in this case, it's a little hard to read this text, so I might want to put a little margin on this. So maybe let's put a little margin of 15 pixels. All right, so it's putting a little margin around that. Keep in mind though, once you start to float things, you're breaking stuff out of the normal flow and it's gonna slightly cause some issues. Okay, we'll get to those issues later. Here I have a painting of his. You'll see it's also, because it's an ing tag, it's moving with the text. All right, it's because this is still based on top, down, left, and right, or the normal flow. I want to put it on the right side of the page. So let's do float right. Let's use a float and float it to the right. This is a class, so I need to go and I'm going to apply it to the image, which should be down on line 63. And let's do float right. Save. And now this will always stay floating on the right side of my document. Okay, it doesn't matter how this lays out. You know, you can see sometimes there's text after it, sometimes there's text before it. It doesn't matter. It's not based on the, you know, on top down anymore. It's just based on, it always has to be connected or attached to the right side of the page. All right. So how can we use this to make a more complex setup? Well, let's go to exercise 3 here. And we're going to make something. Here's a little PDF. We're going to make something that's a simple 2-column layout. Okay, 1 column, 2 columns. I'm going to go to exercise 3. And before we do anything, let's just take a look at the setup. Okay, so I have this section here. The section contains all the information, all the pictures, I should say. Let's preview this just so we can see what it looks like. This has all the images for Andy Warhol and has a picture of Andy Warhol. So I've called that gallery. And then there's a bio about the artist here. Okay. So this is the bio, this is the biography, this is the gallery. Okay. The gallery is supposed to go on the left and the bio is supposed to go on the right. So right now, this is just how things lay out. So it's going normal flow, image. This is an unordered list. So that's a block. So it's going vertically. And this is laying everything out. What I'm going to do is just start by adding some colors so we can see things a little better. So let's do background color yellow. And I'm going to set the bio to orange. Okay. All right. So at the moment, you know, they're 2 big blocks, right? Because sections actually are block elements, which means they take up the entire space. Okay. So if I want to have a layout that's essentially this, where, you know, there's like 1 column and then there's basically another column on the other side, then what I need to do is they can't go, if, you know, if this is going the full width, this was like, you know, I'm going to make this the yellow one. If this is going like that, then there's no space for both of them, right? So I have to make the containers smaller because otherwise there's no space for them. Okay, so what I'm going to do is like, let's just make each one about, 500 pixels. Okay. So I'm going to give each one a width. That's a box model property. All right, so now it's starting to get those columns that I wanted, but the problem is that this is going to the left, and this is also on the left. By the way, one thing I forgot to mention is when you float something, this is something a little important here. I apologize for forgetting about it. When you float something, content, whether you float it to the left or the right, the content underneath it moves up to fill in the available gaps. Okay. I like to call it reverse water. What do I mean by that? Well, water always finds a way to trickle down and to fill in. Like water starts on your roof and then it goes down the drain or, the gutter, and it goes to the ground, and then it seeps into the ground and it goes to the groundwater, right? So water always finds a way to go down, right? It fills in the available space. Well, that's kind of what our content is like here in the Basquiat. I'm going to undo the float temporarily. So it's like when he, there's all this sort of space and there's all this content that's after him. When I float, basically all of that content moved up to fill in the available space. Okay. And it could be any content, and it could be as much or as little content as you want. That's why I kind of call it like water, because water conforms to whatever container it's in. If you pour water in a glass, it conforms to the glass. If you put water in a vase, it conforms to the vase. Well, in this case, my contents is conforming to whatever space is left. Okay. Now, what does that have to do with what we're doing here? Well, I want this to move up there. Okay. So what I'm going to do is if I float this area to the left, content underneath is going to move up. That's this, and it's going to move up. And then I'm going to take this, float it to the right, and then that'll give me my 2-column layout. So let's try that out. I'm going to go here. Oops, wrong exercise. Let's take this, float it to the left. Now, it's starting to work, but you'll notice that this other one, the bio, it didn't do that because it still has all this space here. It has this built-in, what's the word I'm looking for? Built-in block space. So even though we gave it a width, it still takes up this amount of space. So if we float it, it's going to remove that. Let's float that to the right. Okay. So I have a 2-column layout here. Column on the left, that's locked to the left side of the page. Column on the right, that's locked to the right side of the page. Now, note that when you float something, it's easy to think about it as you're floating it to the left or the right side of the page, but it's not technically, you're not putting it on the left or the right side of the page. You're putting it on the left or the right side of the container that it's in. Okay. So for instance, inside of the gallery, which is floating to the left side of the page, I have a picture of Andy Warhol. Okay, right here. What I'm going to do is make a class called float right, and I'm going to apply it to Andy Warhol. So in this case, the container that the picture is in, the image is in, is not the page, but this gallery, this ID gallery section I created. So it's going to go to the right side of that, not the right side of the page. So when I refresh this, and I save, oops, except I didn't actually put any CSS here. All right, let's try that. There you go. this floated, took this, I put it on the right. When you float something, the content underneath moves up to fill in the available space. So what happened here, I floated, when this floated, what happened is this content, AKA the unordered list, moved up and filled in the available space, which in this case was on the left side. All right, that's just kind of a start there. In the next video, we'll continue talking about floats, and we'll talk about how we can break them or clear them and how we can use them for layout.